Hello and welcome back to the Warwick F1 show. We're back with another week talking about the F1 race that just took place, the Monaco Grand Prix, the duel in the F1 crown, and a race that actually wasn't as bad as it's been for the last few years. The rain arrived in the end, causing all sorts of strategy, all sorts of issues. There was one point where there were about five different incidents going on track at once. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately for some, we didn't have a shock victor. Max Verstappen taking another win to add to his tally for the season. Fernando Alonso, ever present on the podium, coming in second place. But there was a shock in third with Esteban Ocon filling out the podium. We're going to discuss all of that, all of the issues the rain had, and obviously the contrasting fortunes of the Red Bulls with Verstappen and Sergio Perez. We're also going to look at the Mercedes. Is there some maybe tension starting to boil with Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, and obviously everything else that's coming along as well? We'll also quickly take a look at the results for the Indy 500, the other big race that took place on the Sunday. Joseph Newgarden taking his first win with a final lap overtake of former F1 driver Marcus Ericsson. But there was some controversy, and we'll discuss that as well as the tyre that very fortunately missed fans as it flew over the grandstand in a crash between Felix Rosenqvist and Carl Kirkwood. And then, as ever, we'll look forward to Spain, the newly laid out Spain. The final chicane has finally gone away, to the delight of, I think, many F1 fans. And will that make a difference? And again, will rain have a role to play this weekend? Obviously, I can't do this on my own. And as ever, I'm here with Chinmay and Will. And we'll start off. Chinmay, what would you give that Monaco Grand Prix out of 10?
I think I'm tempted to give it an 8 out of 10, just because this has been a really good Monaco race. We pretty much had chaos and everything, and we actually did have some overtaking happening, which has been quite rare, especially in the last couple of years. So, I think, especially with and even before the rain, it was actually looking at to be a really good race anyway, especially for Monaco's done it. So I think I'll give it a solid 8 out of 10, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I personally think I'm going to go with a 9. I think it had the weather intrigue, it had a bit of strategy, it had a bit of chaos, a bit of everything you could want. There were things you could improve it, obviously, but for a Monaco Grand Prix, I don't think you can get much better.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. Obviously, it is Monaco. I don't think, unless something crazy happens, I don't think a Monaco race is ever going to get a 10 out of 10. But eight, 7.5, 8 is probably what I'd give it. There was that strategy, there was that intrigue with the rain, and especially after quali, which was arguably one of the best qualifying sessions that we've seen in years. Personally, I didn't watch it. I was playing football, but I saw the results after, and watched the highlights. And Jimmy, it looked like an absolutely epic qualifying that maybe ended with the same drivers near the top, but the way they got there was a lot more unique than what it normally is.
Yeah, especially there was a lot of like really good laps from the likes of Alex Albon, especially in, like Q1 and stuff. And there wasn't. I don't think there were many drivers that you kind of know, oh, like they're definitely going to be out in Q1, Q2, and yeah, it was just a lot of chaos, bit of chaos, especially in the last few minutes. I mean, it did end up happening with Max taking pole, which is just the most inevitable thing that happened this year. But I think knowing how quick that Red Bull is, and knowing how especially the package that Max Verstappen is utilizing, how well he's utilizing it. Yeah, I don't think we we could have, and it would have been nice to see an Alonso pole, but it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, although Verstappen did get that pole, it was the final sector that blew everyone away, 3/10 down on Fernando Alonso after sector two before coming and snatching pole away from the Spaniard. And I think, or Christian Horner has described it as that Saudi Arabia lap back in 2021 that we sometimes mention, obviously, the lap that ended at the final corner as he crashed, or as Verstappen crashed there. But this time he managed to put in an epic lap and managed to get the epic sector three that ultimately took him to the front row.
Yeah, I think it's quite an impressive feat to come from 2/10 down in a relatively short final sector at Monaco. It's not something you can say, oh, it was the car, because ultimately it was driver skill. And I think Max kind of silenced some critics there saying, oh, they're only winning all these races because of their cars, and just showed just how good he is as a driver.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was after qualifying they showed the side by side between Alonso and Verstappen, and then just the fact that I think Max Verstappen took about two not, I think over 2/10 just from the Rascasse corner alone just shows how good that placement really was in that final sector, just that driver skill. So yeah, I think that's just something to really commend Max's performance there.
Yeah, but unfortunately, the other big incident that came out of qualifying was the Leclerc curse continuing. Leclerc putting it I think, yeah, putting it in third place, just behind Alonso and Verstappen, but getting a three-place grid drop for holding up Lando Norris. And I mean, well, it seemed fairly slam dunk that it was infringement when you look at the onboards.
Oh, 100%. I think as soon as you saw the footage, you knew that penalty was coming. And I think it just sums up Ferrari's season, really. The second they have anything positive, there's just something just taking them back straight away. So Charles was doing one in Bahrain, oh, his engine's gone. Or they're having a good race in, I think it was Saudi, but then get done by the safety car or things like this. And it's now seems to be the tail of Ferrari season, that they can't do something good without something bad happening.
Yeah, and I mean, Chime, Fred, that has been Ferrari's season so far. They've not been at their standards, definitely compared to last year. But even now, you'd have to say Aston Martin definitely ahead of them, or at least Fernando Alonso. Even Mercedes potentially gaining a march on the Scuderia outfit. Fred Vasseur saying that they're going to stick with the SF23 concept that they're developing, but when you look to Mercedes, they're now so willing to radically overhaul what their car is with obviously the new side pods that did come in Monaco. Do you think that's maybe the wrong step to take, especially if Mercedes and Aston Martin, and maybe to a lesser extent because they are so far ahead, Red Bull, do keep improving, and even Alpine as well. Obviously, we'll come to talk about it, but Esteban Ocon on the podium, Pierre Gasly competing with the Ferraris during the race. Are they at risk of, if they are too stubborn to change what is going wrong, that they might fall back into the clutches of the French team?
Maybe, but I think one thing to really mention is that Monaco is not the best place to compare genuine car performances, especially because of the nature of the Monaco circuit being so different to every all the others. Obviously being that sort of slower, high downforce circuit. I mean, the thing is, Ferrari haven't been absolute. They've sort of been kind of mixing around with Aston and Mercedes, and we don't really know how well the new Mercedes upgrades have truly been. I mean, for Monaco, they didn't seem to make too much of a difference. Um, but yeah, I think maybe it might be still too early to tell whether the Ferrari concept was a bad idea. Because I mean, if you do look at last year as well, they had the same concept. Ferrari were actually ahead of Red Bull. I mean, obviously, Red Bull completely outdeveloped Ferrari, and there were a lot of other factors that did cause Ferrari's downfall last season as well. Strategy definitely not being one of them, but you know, it. Yeah, I think there's still potential, but I think there's obviously that is not. We don't know what the true data is, what the true performance really is, what the potential they see in the car is. But obviously Mercedes thought their concept wasn't going anywhere, so they decided to change. We don't know. We'll see what Ferrari has to say. Probably close in summer break, we'll find out more.
Yeah, we'll jump into the race now, and I think it was a very two halves race. Obviously, we had the dry half and then the wet half, and even though even it's Monaco, obviously, overtaking comes at a premium, very quite unlikely with the cars being as large as they are. But well, even at the start of the race, and even throughout the first stage, when there was that maybe rain on the horizon, but it hadn't arrived yet, it was a fairly decent race with some good racing.
Yeah, I think the drivers this year were a bit braver. I think the cars seem a bit more structurally well built, so you can get away with a little bit of damage. We saw Carlos Sainz rear end, I think it was Ocon, and seemed to carry on well with losing a large piece of his front wing. So I think the drivers were a bit more willing to say, okay, you gain a lot more from actually having that extra bit of risk. So it's whether the reward is worth it. And I think for a lot of drivers it was, because the pace you're losing behind those cars is so significant.
Yeah, and you mentioned the integrity of or structural integrity of the cars, and it was amazing to see how many cars Chinmay did bounce off barriers at some point, both in the dry and in the wet, bounced off each other, like Perez hitting Russell, Verstappen hitting the barrier, Perez like very, very hitting the barrier very hard. And it was quite shocking to see that in previous years, you'd maybe see these incidents and think, oh, that will take them out of the race completely. But the drivers and the cars seem to be built of steel this year, and were able to continue regardless of like sort of what issues and what contact they had.
No, yeah, this is definitely a big positive now, because at least with the stronger structural integrity, we can actually start to see drivers sort of pushing a bit more to the limits, not being afraid to at least take a bit of contact. I think probably the only ones is still probably the front wing. The front wing still looks to be quite fragile, but I think that's very, very difficult to actually make, especially strong, especially with how thin they try to make the front wings themselves. But I think, yeah, definitely, there definitely seem to be a lot more stronger now. Like I said, I think Verstappen hit a few corners at least about 3, 4 times during that quality lap at the end of Q3, and the car seemed to be fine. And then I think, and especially I think we'll go back and we'll probably mention this a bit later, but Perez, when he had I think he pretty much sideswiped the car on Q1 or something to get him out, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, the car obviously it did break the suspension, but then the rest of the car was fine. Whereas a couple of years ago, that sort of showed might have broken the gearbox, as we saw with probably Charles Leclerc in 2020. I mean, even though that was a much stronger hit as well.
Yeah, and eventually, obviously, while it was maybe interesting, perhaps not as much to talk about for the dry period, but the rain was always on the horizon, and it eventually arrived, I think, at about lap 50 odd. I mean, for both of you, I mean, how happy were you when you saw the rain start to come down, when George Russell reported the rain to be spitting at the hairpin in the west of the circuit, as obviously the weather was coming in from there.
I mean, I was quite excited, but also slightly annoyed, because Ferrari started both their drivers on hard tyres, which at the time looked amazing, and yet they decided to pit both of them very early, one of which Sainz just to cover off Hamilton, which seems a bit silly in hindsight, and then Leclerc about 10 laps before the rain comes. So it was a bit frustrating, but it did tee up a good race, I think, as well. You had George Russell was out there. I think there was another driver out on hard as well that hadn't pitted. And then Alonso, had he stayed out a few laps longer, could have been in the mix. But Aston Martin were like, no, we're going to channel that in a Ferrari today and put him on slicks when everyone else is on inters. But yeah, it was exciting when the rain started to come.
Not to mention, I thought that Kevin Magnussen they did decide to ignore him. He was just on hards the entire time. I'm like,
They were just like, the rain does not exist. Like, we're just gonna leave him on the hard tire. But
yeah.
How did you find the rain?
I mean, I was pretty pumped, to be fair, just to see how teams would react to the rain. How it ended up being last year as well, when the rain when there was all drying up, it caused a lot of chaos. Not the chaos that I wanted, because the curse did fall down on Leclerc. That was the going to obviously the double stack that going wrong and everything. But no, definitely with the rain, it definitely did spice up things a bit more, just to see it was basically you could just see the real skill of the drivers just trying to navigate their way around on the slicks, and some people did it, some people didn't, and obviously, yeah, it just added to a bit of chaos.
Yeah, it's probably worth going over like the winners and the losers of the rain. Maybe starting off with the winners or the drivers that at least didn't fall back from their positions. Obviously, the driver that went on to win the race, Max Verstappen, another great performance, and especially when people were saying, Will, that this could be the race where Red Bull do have those issues and maybe aren't going to take that win. It was quite a statement when Verstappen did put it on pole and then was so dominant throughout the race.
Yeah, I think from start to finish, Max was very in control. I think he basically just had yellow painted hard tyres, effectively. His mediums just didn't fall off, they just kept going. Alonso could do nothing about it ultimately. He did struggle a bit when the rain first came down. I think if Aston had pitted, it would have been a bit more interesting had they put Alonso on Inters, but we'll never know. But I think just to show off like the skill and dominance of him in that car was very daunting for the rest of the grid, I think, for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think especially with Max going 55 laps on the mediums, kind of extra just shows more evidence about the state of the tires at the moment. That the fact that they're too good in a way that I mean I think the fact that it just doesn't really add much to the tire strategy when you can where there's that option to have that one stopper or two stopper that kind of added that bit of intrigue. But yeah, I think I would definitely. It's not really much to say in terms of Max obviously almost had a perfect race. Alonso couldn't even if they didn't make the mistake of putting to mediums, I don't think it would have made much of a difference to the result. Obviously, Ocon doing a fantastic job to stay in third, and then Hamilton Russell having a decent set of results as well. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And maybe we'll talk about Alonso quickly, Jimmy. Obviously, you've said there they perhaps made the mistake of pitting for mediums onto the lap before, then coming straight back in for inters. That might have put them quite close to Verstappen, but you'd have to say second place from the weekend, maybe at the moment, probably the highest expectations that Aston Martin could hope for. Obviously, it wasn't guaranteed that they'd get out ahead of Verstappen if they hadn't made that mistake. And 18 points, Alonso's highest total of the season, obviously scoring 15 in each of the first few races. It's another solid performance for the green team.
Yeah. No, I think Alonso couldn't. He's done the best performance he basically could have done. But yeah, I think just Max and Red Bull are just too far ahead at the moment, and that no, I think we say this every week. We just need to ban Adrian Newey, but you know, but yeah, no. No, I think definitely just at least we can establish now that this is not a fluke from Aston Martin. They have genuinely stepped up this year, and it's really really good to see, especially Fernando Alonso. I mean, oldest of the grid. He definitely doesn't perform like the oldest on the grid at all. He's still got so much left in the tank, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Uh, but yeah, I think we'll probably mention it later, but we'll see if he can stay in 2026 when a certain engine returns to the grid.
Yeah, obviously Honda coming back to power Aston Martin from 2026. But well, you've got one side of the garage, Fernando Alonso. He's outscoring. I think third in the championship, outscoring Ferrari on his own. But he is, or maybe his team hampered a bit by his teammate, Lance Stroll, who I think fair to say didn't have a very probably maybe the second worst race on the grid. Didn't have or wasn't great in qualifying, I think out in Q1, and then fairly average performance until he collided with the barriers at the Lowe's hairpin, and then eventually retired from the race. And I mean, what does Stroll need to change? He's not been that consistent. Obviously, his best result in Australia, but Other than that, not been very consistent and definitely second best to his Spanish teammate.
Yeah, I think he's in a bit of a tricky situation in general. Like, his teammate is a very good driver and has always got the best out of his cars. It reminds me, kind of watching back, and it's going to hurt me to say this, look to the early Ferrari days, when Kimi kind of returned to Ferrari and Alonso was just so far clear of him most weekends, just because he can get the most out of the car regardless of setup. I think Stroll is similar to Kimi in the sense that if the setup isn't there for him, he will struggle that weekend, more so than perhaps someone like Kimi would have. But when he has the setup, we've seen in the past that he can be a really good, really quick driver. But somewhere like Monaco, if you're not happy with the car and if you're going out early and keep you for a good weekend.
Yeah, and I mean, although it was quite entertaining, Chinmay, just seeing him sort of like clonk the hairpin and then just keep going at the next corner. It was very like F1 game vibes, especially when I try and drive around Monaco. I can't handle it on the controller, but obviously Lance Stroll does have that job security with his dad, being quite a large investor or shareholder in Aston Martin. But do you think there does come a point where, especially if Alonso keeps putting in these performances, keeps getting maybe 15, 18, maybe even minimum 12 points a weekend, and Stroll isn't doing that, at what point do Aston Martin think we could be very solid second in the championship, but we're competing with Mercedes? They're just 1 point ahead of Mercedes. We could be competing with Ferrari because it's only one driver that's putting in the performances, and the second one is like falling behind.
Yeah. And especially this is now the second race in a row now where he's not been in the points, because obviously the last race in Miami, don't forget Imola was cancelled. Lance was nowhere near the entire race as well. So I think he finished 12th, I believe. I'll quickly double check that now. Yes, he was 12th. So while Alonso finished third. So
Mm.
it's there has to be a point where even Lawrence Stroll was like, he has to be to his son, like, you've got to kind of start pushing forward now, because the fact that this is his best chance to actually shine. You're going against one of the greats of the sport, and you're competing with the likes of Mercedes and Ferrari, with the chance to actually do an upset and get that second place in the championship. And if you're not going to do that, then how long is he going to be realistically going to be on the grid for?
Yeah. Well, obviously, he's got another race to make up for it this weekend. But a driver that did outperform their car this weekend, finishing in third place, Esteban Ocon, getting the first podium for, I guess you could say, a midfield team since Lando Norris all the way back in Imola of last year. And it was just an outstanding weekend from the French driver. He was so close to almost taking pole, just a tenth behind Max Verstappen and Fernando Alonso. Obviously, upgraded to that third place with Charles Leclerc's penalty, but under pressure throughout you could say the majority of the race, but held strong and came home for Alpine's first podium since I think his podium in 2021.
Yeah, I think for Esteban it was a very special weekend. I think the lap on the Saturday almost set him up perfectly for the Sunday, and I think it was one of those magical laps almost where if he'd been in, say, a Red Bull or a Ferrari, he would have been comfortably on pole. I think we know the deficit is there between the teams. So I think just to be able to be within a tenth is quite phenomenal. I think, I don't know if this will play much of an impact, but the fact that the French Grand Prix isn't there, this is almost a home Grand Prix for that team, almost. So it wasn't just Ocon that had a good weekend, although he did finish on the podium. Pierre Gasly had a relatively strong weekend by Alpine standards, and Alpine in general picked up a good handful of points and showed kind of the promise that they'd almost said they would have at the start of the season, and it's starting to come through. So I think for Alpine in general, and especially Esteban, they can walk away from that weekend knowing that they've done more than they could ever be expected to.
Yeah, and this comes, Jimmy, after criticism of Alpine and Ocon by the Alpine CEO, and you could almost say it's the best response possible to that criticism. He has outperformed that car. He's finished ahead of both Mercedes, both Ferraris, and on the podium. First podium for the team since 2021. And it, do you think there is that trend of Alpine perhaps getting a little bit closer to maybe Ferrari and Mercedes? We've seen in Australia, Pierre Gasly was putting in a really good performance until unfortunately they had that restart, both drivers knocking themselves out of the race. But you can say that on their day, Alpine are almost challenging the top, well, at least the second, third, and fourth place teams in Red Bull, or not Red Bull, sorry, Ferrari, Mercedes, and Aston Martin.
Yeah, I think we can say not Red Bull for sure, but there's definitely scope for them to be knocking on the door, and especially in races, especially with Ferrari, Mercedes, and Aston Martin, that they are closing the gap for sure. There seem to be, I think they seem to be the solid fifth place team at the moment, especially with the top seat. With their, you can kind of see their closest rivals being McLaren just being all over the place this season. They still need to find their mojo. But yeah, I think we've definitely seen elements of it this year with like I said, Australia, and obviously with Monaco, pretty much they were in the mix. Yeah, and it depends on, I think, all depends on mid-season development more than anything else again, and driver performance to see how far they go.
Yeah, and perhaps another thing, we haven't seen that inter-team rivalry sort of develop between Ocon and Gasly so far. I think at the start of the season, with their history, most people were expecting that they might have a few issues, but Ocon and Gasly and Will, they've seem to get along fairly well, seem to stay out of each other's way, and they're both showing that they are good quality drivers. When maybe some people were favoring Ocon over Gasly, and some people are favouring obviously Gasly over Ocon.
Yeah, I think both drivers have had their doubters in the last year, 18 months, especially Pierre Gasly after his last year at AlphaTauri. I think both of them this year have shown that they can pull out a strong drive and have been consistent, have been challenging, haven't had any big wrecks really, I think, other than Australia. So I think they seem to be getting on much better than most people would expect. And how much of that is down to Otmar Saf now, I really doubt is any of it, because he's not got the best history, but they're doing their best despite him almost there, I suppose.
Yeah. And I mean, do you think, well, have we just jinxed it? Do you think that they'll come to blows at Spain, Chile, or do you think that this is just they do recognise that at the moment they're in a bit of a no man's land? They're sort of behind the top four teams, slightly ahead of the rest of the grid, maybe with a possible exception of McLaren. But do you think that it's almost like a Mercedes last year when at the start of the season they were quite far behind the top two, quite far ahead of the rest of the grid, so they just were sort of getting along well.
Yeah, I think there's a mutual respect for the time being, but as with every team pairing, there's going to be a point where there's going to be a point of friction. Whether it comes at Spain or not, obviously we'll have to see. But yeah, and obviously knowing the history between the two, maybe it could be a lot more volatile if them two do come together again. But we'll have to see how it goes, really.
Yeah, and we'll move on to the team I just mentioned there as well, Mercedes, and their race. Obviously bringing a lot more upgrades, or a lot of new upgrades, an all new car. People calling it the W14B. Obviously, the last car with those that sequence of letters and numbers was the 1992 Williams, that dominant car. But well, maybe the upgrades, was it not? Have I got that wrong?
The RB16B.
Ooh. but the Williams are the FW14B, so they've just got an F as well.
Yeah. That's what I was saying,
Yeah.
but if the last B spec car was actually Red Bull's RB16B in 2021.
Was that a B spec car?
That was a B spec car. They called it the
Uh,
RB16B, I believe. There's no RB17.
is there not?
No, it's the RB16. Yep.
Well, the more you know. I did not
Yeah.
know that. But Will, maybe these upgrades not working as well as that Williams back in the 90s, as well as the 2021 Red Bull, or is it too early to say? Do you think that obviously we've mentioned how Monaco isn't that sort of relevant, that representative, and it will be the next few races where we see whether their introduction of side pods does have a role in perhaps bringing them to the top of that upper midfield that they're in currently, and maybe even challenging Red Bull at the top.
Yeah, I think the next few races will give a much better idea. I think Spain, I believe it's Canada after that. So 2 big races where there's a lot of where the main overtaking points are at the end of long straights. So we'll see, do the new side pods have any impact on how well they can follow cars in straight lines, how well they can slipstream? Because ultimately the no side pods did help that. They seemed very slippy, tucked behind cars to be able to sneak up on them. I think Monaco, it still showed that rear end did like to step out quite a bit. And so whether that holds, especially with more high-speed corners, we'll yet to see. But it was positive signs in terms of result. How much that's related to the car, we'll yet to know.
Yeah, and Chinmay, they obviously did get that good result, finishing fourth and fifth. In the end, Lewis Hamilton's maybe having more of a quieter race, just sort of putting in those performances. I think him and Esteban Ocon moving away from George Russell towards the end of the race. But Russell's race, and maybe some of his comments during it were spoken about a bit more after the race. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, they're just being a bit ambitious there. I think that's my verdict on it. But I mean, but to be fair, I do think there have been points this season where I think Russell thinks he's becoming the number one driver. I mean, there is a natural progression, especially because Lewis is now, I believe, he's the second oldest driver on the grid,
Yeah,
or is
yeah.
Nico older?
I think Lewis is a year or two older.
Yeah, but well, either way, like we don't know how long he's got left in the sport. I mean, honestly, he does want to chase his eighth title. There is no denying that he definitely wants his eighth. But whether that will actually come and whether Mercedes can actually catch up to Red Bull, that's a different. That's a story for another day. But
Mm.
yeah, I think the thing is with them, you've got 2 drivers at the top of their game. Well, I don't know about Russell at the moment, but there's 2 top class drivers, and if you put them in the same car, the friction is going to come out, and eventually we saw that. I mean, look at Lewis's last actually competitive teammate, Nico Rosberg. I think
Mm.
I don't need to explain more on that really.
Yeah, and obviously we're heading to the track where they had their biggest collision in Spain, and we'll maybe run through what Russell did. So starting on the hard tires, proved the best decision for him as he was able to run the hard tires until the rain, able to jump up to fourth place in the end. Looked to be heading for that fourth place before he went, or looked to be heading for the third place. Sorry, I think he'd even jumped ahead of Esteban Ocon until he slid down the escape road at the bottom of the Casino Square hill, then reversed back out onto the track, was clunked by Perez, and then got a 5 second time penalty. Obviously, with that 5 second time penalty, he's at threat from the Ferraris behind him, which were Leclerc and Sainz. So came on the radio and asked if they could invert the cars, and Russell wouldn't go more than 5 seconds ahead of Lewis, and then obviously once the penalty is applied, he'll drop back behind him in the final results. I mean, Will, what did you think of what Russell was trying to do? Do you think that was fair? Do you think it was a good decision? or it would have been a good decision, or do you think that that is maybe trying to stamp his authority on the team, and as Chinmay said, try and identify himself as the number one driver?
I think it was pretty silly of George to even suggest that. He was, 3.5 seconds behind Lewis when he said this in the first place. And the Ferraris were 6-7 seconds behind and dropping back quite quickly, unfortunately for me. It was silly. Like, if he's not going to go 5 seconds ahead of Lewis and wants Lewis to effectively back up the Ferraris, surely if he's not 5 seconds ahead of Lewis, the Ferraris will probably be within 5 seconds. So ultimately, if they were going to catch him, they would catch Lewis. So it was just George trying to get one up on Lewis, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, do you think it was significant that it wasn't, or as far as we were aware on the broadcast, that decision was never, or that option was never even communicated to Lewis, who seemed to, I mean, he seemed to just be having a fairly quiet yet fairly consistent race, did put that pressure on Esteban Ocon, and both of them by the end of it were solid, 10, 15 seconds ahead of Russell, and just sort of stamping their authority on how the race had gone.
No, I don't think it's anything significant. I think Mercedes just basically just told George to stop being silly and just focus on his own race. The Ferrari's not a threat. I think had Leclerc got within maybe say 4 seconds and it was holding there, they might have said, "Okay, Lewis, we know you have the pace to pull away in that last lap or whatever, so we'll try it." George trying to be the number one driver and Mercedes just ignoring him, basically.
Yeah. And I mean, Chinmay, do you think that this will have any long-term repercussions? Obviously, you could say maybe George Russell was quite lucky to even be in the position in the first place, did get that benefit of the rain and the tyre strategies until he did make that mistake, and that maybe even, do you think he does deserve to think he's the number one driver? Obviously, he's 4-2 ahead of Lewis in quali, but 4-2 behind him in terms of race results. Lewis getting the only podium for Mercedes so far. What do you think that he should be considered the number one driver, or maybe shouldn't be quite so high in what he's thinking so far?
Not yet. I would say definitely not yet, because of the fact that, Lewis Hamilton is still beating him in the races, and you do not get points in qualifying. That's the thing. Like, you get points in the race and not in qualifying. Yes, you out qualify him 4-2, but if you're falling behind in the race, then that doesn't mean a thing. And you need, and the number one driver is the person who performs better than the second driver. And at the moment, I would say Lewis is ahead of Russell. Or in fact, at least they're very equal at the moment, to the extent that Russell does not have a clear authority to at least to make Hamilton move out the way whenever he feels like it. And anyway, if Lewis is ahead, even if Russell was a de facto number one driver, he shouldn't be. He shouldn't. I think Lewis would just have to stay ahead, because the fact at the end of the day, for Mercedes at least, the Constructors' Championship matters a bit more than the drivers, because that's where you get the bulk of the prize money.
Yeah, and yeah, we'll obviously have to wait and see how that dynamic will play out. One more driver that we need to talk about, who may have had the worst performance in F1 history, relative to how good his car was, is Sergio Perez. I mean, Chinmay, it was just sort of, there's not really much to say about it. It was just a shocking performance from the Mexican driver that just over the weekend, obviously crashing in qualifying, and then even in the race making a number of mistakes, eventually finishing 16th, I think, 2 laps down on his teammate.
It is just painful. It is painful. I mean, the fact that Checo was one of my favorite drivers on the grid, and just to see him with that fall from grace, and especially knowing that he is the winner from last year. He was excellent in the race last year, but then Yes, yeah, he bins it in qualifying. He bins it in the race at least 3 times. Gets lapped by Max twice, not once but twice. And then and makes a stupid mistake of just rear-ending into the Haas. Yeah, I just can't say it. It was just awful from Checo, and especially when what you expect from Checo, where he thought he actually was sort of keeping up to Max as well.
Yeah, I mean, Will, can you think of any performance that was quite so? I don't want to say bad because Checo's a lovely person, but it just wasn't a really great race from the Mexican driver.
For someone that's meant to be like the street circuit guru and supposedly in this championship fight, to finish quite low down, 17th or 18th, and get lapped twice by your teammate, and then as on top of qualifying last, I think it's almost got to a point where people are a bit like, well, it's basically Max's championship now. It's kind of reaffirmed everyone's idea that Checo would just drop off eventually. And if there was any circuit where you might say, oh, this could be a turning point for Checo, in Checo's favour, it's been the complete opposite. Max just dominated the whole weekend once he got happy with his car, while Checo just went from bad to worse, effectively.
Yeah, I mean, no sort of redeeming qualities for his performance there. Are we missing any drivers? I'm trying to think of what else took place. Any drivers or any team drivers that you want to maybe discuss quickly before we move on?
I don't think so. There's any more noteworthy performances, but probably on the side note, McLaren finally have a double points finish again.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean McLaren will doing quite well. They getting that double points finish, and is that just what they need to be doing? They just need to be climbing up ever so slightly to be gaining those performances and getting those points where at the moment they are sort of maybe a standalone sixth place team.
Yeah, I don't think so. There's anybody much more Monaco really. It's really the race. Yeah.
Cool. Well, that has been the Monaco Grand Prix, an entertaining one, I think. The fact we haven't had to discuss should Monaco be on the calendar for another year probably indicates that it was a better one than we'd normally expect. Although this is an F1 podcast, I feel like we'd be missing out if we didn't quickly discuss the Indy 500 that obviously took place on the same day. Myself and Will, we were watching it in the pub. Chinmay, you joined us a bit later. And Will, I think it's fair to say the first 90 odd laps weren't the most entertaining in the world, were they?
No, it wasn't entertaining. I think it was interesting. It was setting up for a good kind of finale. The drivers were also close, so the second that one thing went wrong, it could have led to a lot of intrigue, which ultimately it did. But the first sort of 90 laps were quite boring until you said, I'm going to get up, and when I come back, there better not have been a caution. And within 30 seconds of you leaving the table, there was one.
You're welcome. It was all me. It's all me. There's no credit goes to the drivers that caused maybe the caution. I would say it was all me. But no, the second half of the race much better. But there are a few incidents that we want to talk about. Obviously, probably the biggest crash of the day was between Felix Rosenqvist and Carl Kirkwood. Rosenqvist losing it out of turn one, breaking his rear and then front suspension, spinning back onto the track. Obviously, no fault of his own at that point. He was a passenger, but then colliding with Carl Kirkwood, whose wheel shot off the car out of the stadium and landed on someone's car in the car park. And obviously, well, that's not like back in the early 90s before wheel tethers, that was a more regular occurrence, and it did lead to spectator deaths. And you'd have to say that IndyCar this year was very lucky that the same thing didn't happen.
Yeah, it was a very scary incident at the time. The second you see that wheel go, I think we saw it quite comprehensively crush someone's car. So if that had been someone standing there, or if that had gone into the crowd, then there would have been serious discussions had. I mean, ultimately, I think one of the aims this year was to have stronger wheel tethers. But I think just the speed and the angle, it was kind of, this is the worst possible thing that could happen. It was just a very chance incident.
Yeah. I mean, Chinmay, what are your thoughts? Obviously, motorsport is still very dangerous. It's still a risk to both the drivers and the spectators. And do you think this was just a once in a million freak accident that fortunately didn't have or didn't have negative consequences?
Yeah, no, I think we were quite lucky, that the tire smashed into a car, not into a person's head. Or smashed into a car with nobody in it as well. So
Mm,
I think the only real damage that we've got was obviously them two. The shock. Thankfully, the two drivers were pretty much walked out fine from the looks of things. And the only real damage was three cars. Obviously the two Indy cars that totaled, and that saloon car that
mm,
the tire landed on.
yeah,
But yeah, it was a pretty scary crash when looked at, and especially looking at the you know but luckily, safety has advanced so far in motorsport in general that, if this was about 15, 20 years ago, he would have been dead. So
mm,
maybe even 10 years ago, to be fair, he would at least be in hospital. But, motorsport is, at least, it is a reminder that motorsport is very extremely dangerous. We see it in Formula One, we've seen in IndyCar multiple times, especially the Indy 500 and MotoGP, the Ironman TT, which unfortunately had a lot of tragedy last year as well. But
yeah,
yeah, I think the only thing we can do is just really advance safety, and this obviously without trying to get rid of the peril, because yes, we talk about safety, but there's also that danger side that kind of makes motorsport as thrilling as it is to watch and be part in.
yeah. I mean, the lawless nature of the IndyCar pit lane really, really shone through with obviously some of the incidents there. But back on the track, we saw a few more crashes and incidents as well. Pato O'Ward putting in a strong performance before he tried to dive up the inside of Marcus Ericsson, sorry, which ended in tears. We had incidents on the start finish straight um, for the second restart that we did
Yeah.
end up having. I mean, well, it was all boiling, or it was all boiling down to like a final lap showdown, and I think what we ended up getting.
Yeah, it all set up quite nicely. I think for the end, I think we weren't really sure whether we'd get that final lap shootout or not. Looking back at some of the incidents, so I watched the Pato Award one back, and actually he had a run up the inside, and Ericsson kind of squeezed him, forced him to ease off a bit, and it was Ericsson coming down onto Pato that almost caused the crash. I think Pato said in his post-crash interview, that actually next time he's going to make sure that Ericsson comes with him. So that'll be interesting the next time they go racing, and actually this weekend, I think.
Yeah, I think they're in Detroit, I want to
So
say, or Charlotte or something. They're somewhere. But it did end with that final lap shootout between Marcus Ericsson and Joseph Newgarden, both, or Ericsson going for back-to-back wins, first driver since Castro Neves in 2001 and 2002. If he accomplished that feat, Joseph Newgarden, one of the most popular and arguably or seen as the greatest driver to never win an Indy 500, going for his obviously first victory, and it ended up with Newgarden taking the victory. But Chime, there were some who didn't like that. Shades of maybe Abu Dhabi 2021. So in IndyCar, what normally happens is you come out of the pits, do one lap to warm up the tires, keep going, and then on that second lap, that the pace car peels in, and then obviously you go racing. That didn't happen this on the final lap. They went straight out onto the track, and then the pace car peeled in, and we obviously got that final lap showdown. Do you think that was the correct decision? Do you think that maybe it should have ended on the caution, and I guess was it similar to Abu Dhabi 2021, as some people were saying?
I can't. I don't think so. Is as bad in my opinion. But then obviously we do have that rule. There's no rule in IndyCar that dictates how many laps it needs to be. That so it was all within the rules and everything like that. And I'd say it's a lot. It was a lot. It's a lot less vague compared to Abu Dhabi 2021. And and also that final lap shootout was actually a really competitive last lap shootout with them literally going wheel to wheel. Newgarden obviously them both sort of doing but weaving, moving about, which I really enjoyed. I'm not against it, even though I know there was a lot of people in the F1 group chat who were kind of saying, "Oh, there was a lot too much weaving, too dangerous." I'm like, not really. I feel like yeah, okay, in F1 maybe you get it because F1's so rule based and it's so to the rules, whereas the IndyCar's a bit looser in that, in my opinion. And I kind of prefer how IndyCar sorts out their overtaking rules a bit as well. But yeah, I don't think there was much. I don't have much to complain about really. But I can understand why there was a little bit of backlash about it.
Yeah, I think for me it wasn't really that controversial. I think I might be wrong, but I think a few years ago after that it was kind of a prolonged caution ended the race. IndyCar actually introduced a rule meaning this can't happen, so that you should just red flag the race so that you at least try to end under racing unless there is a crash on the last 2 laps. So I think the fact that this happened isn't controversial in the slightest. And I think actually the problem is that you have a lot of new fans coming into the sport from Formula One with more F1, the difference in rules and kind of how things operate, and leading to confusion and people being annoyed and frustrated, or people just having pepped up anger left from 2021 in Abu Dhabi and just wanting to take it out somewhere.
Yeah, and I guess just to finish off, were you happy with the winner? I mean, personally, I wasn't that aware of Joseph Newgarden. Obviously, as an F1 fan, I was aware of who he was. Obviously, Marcus Ericsson, former F1 driver. I didn't really have many opinions on who won, but I think just the end of the race being good was the main thing. But yeah, you guys happy with who won? Maybe disappointed that some drivers didn't end up competing for the win.
I think it was it was a good result for him, a good race throughout. I would have preferred Pato to have won or a McLaren driver to have won, but I think going into the last 3 laps with him, Ericsson, and Ferrucci, there was only one person that I actually wanted to win.
Oh god, I could have. No, I would have burst into tears if freaking Ferrucci won that race. I'm sorry, but
He
yeah,
was
no,
concerningly close to winning.
Yeah, unfortunately, but I'm glad it didn't. Even if it was Ericsson, Pato, Newgarden, I wasn't too fussed. It was a good race. It was a good finish. You know, I, I think I'm happy. I'm content with the result. There's nothing I would change much.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll tune in next year as well. Hopefully we have 2 good races like we did this year, as well in 2024. But think that's everything. Let's move on now to the Spanish Grand Prix that is taking place this weekend, and it's one that maybe we need to have a look at a bit more because Chinmay, a lot has changed, especially with the track and the most hated chicane in Formula One has finally left the grid, and we've gone back to pre-2007 Spain with the final 2 corners being those fast right-handers.
Yeah, no, I don't think when that was announced, I don't think that I haven't ever seen the F1 community so unanimously accept and be happy about one thing, especially in the last couple of years, that the final chicane has finally been removed. But I think fingers crossed and touch wood and everything that hopefully that it does make a difference to the racing, that we can actually have some good fighting going into turn 1, because I really like that first sector of Catalonia. So that right left, and saw that sort of long unturning turn type thing, and then obviously It is. I do actually like that first sector in Catalonia, so it does provide some good racing. Obviously, the race of the circuit doesn't really provide that much good racing, but hopefully this should, fingers crossed, make some difference.
Yeah, I mean, Will, are you just happy to see the chicane gone, even if it might benefit Red Bull in their undying quest to build the fastest F1 car imaginable? Obviously, they've got that long straight. Have you seen the DRS zone is the entire straight? It's ridiculous how long it is.
Mhm.
And I mean, do you think that will benefit Red Bull?
I think anything benefits Red Bull at the moment. I think a car is just ahead in every situation almost. I think Monaco showed that they can just win at any circuit. So I think anything is going to benefit Red Bull at this point. But it's more of a question of which other team will it impact. So will someone like Aston Martin lose out from this, where they've been struggling a bit more in the straight lines compared to, say, Mercedes and Ferrari? So we'll see which teams it will benefit more. Hopefully, like Chinmay said, we'll get some more action into turn one, get some more overtakes and overtaken by the start finish line.
Yeah, and we'll prepare for that by making our predictions. But first, we need to go over our Monaco Grand Prix predictions, and
Yep.
I'll hand it over to Chime. And I think it's fair to say we were terrible this week. I think this must be our worst week so far.
I'm pretty sure this is comfortably our last, our worst week yet. And I'm actually talking about both, even compared to last season as well.
Oh my god.
It's definitely comparable. But okay, so going into Monaco, it was 27-25 to Will. And then I'll go through the podium predictions first. So Will, you predicted Perez, Hamilton, Leclerc. None of
I
them
was
will reach the podium.
all wrong.
Yeah. I predicted Alonso, Verstappen, and then Russell. So I do get 2 points from that.
Which it's
Uh,
not. It wasn't a bad shout. If Alonso qualified on pole, you have to say could have gone on to win, but
yeah.
not ideal.
I just
Probably
didn't want to predict.
Should have had 3 at George Russell not binned it.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah,
That's true.
we'll have to blame Russell for that one.
So, but then we also got. So then we'll go for the 1 pointer. So you predicted that the Mercedes upgrades work, and then it will be up to general consensus. And I'm gonna go no. I'll say
Yeah,
inconclusive.
I'd say inconclusive is probably the best. Yeah, the one I go
So
for. I think there was potential there that they worked,
yeah,
but we
I think
don't
there's
know
definitely.
yet.
Oh yeah, I think we won't really know the impact until Spain. So this weekend
Mm.
really, to see how good they are. But then my 1 pointer was both Astons finish in the top 8, which obviously didn't happen because Lance Stroll decided to bin it about 400 times.
Mm.
And then our 2 pointers, Will, yours was Verstappen complains about something that doesn't affect performance. I don't think so. He actually did this time.
No, I was looking out for it, but he didn't.
No,
I was sad.
and I don't think he actually complained a lot in this race. To be fair, I mean he did have anything to complain about. And then my one, there'll be no more than 2 on-track overtakes during the race, and there was like 3 in 1 lap on Luke and Sargent. So
Well, at least that one being wrong meant we got a good race as opposed
yeah,
to what we've had for the
yeah.
last few years.
Yeah, I was actually counting on that one, me not getting that, but it is what it is. And then the 3 pointer, there was single redeeming feature of our predictions this week. I'll start first. I'll go. I said that Leclerc crashes out the race in the podium when he's in a podium position. That never happened. He didn't
No,
crash out too, thankfully. But
we
yeah,
we still had a Leclerc crash, but in F2 with Arthur Leclerc.
yeah. I think after Leclerc took a little bit of the curse away. And then, your 3 pointer was that a Red Bull finishes outside the top 4, but doesn't
Yeah.
DNF. But doesn't
Well,
DNF. So
whereas as much as he was trying to, he did not DNF.
nope. So you actually got 3 points. So you will actually won this week 3-2, and compiling that onto the thing, you've extended your points to 3 point lead. So extend by 1 to 30-27.
Nice. I mean, Will, we were terrible. You can just give your verdict on our shocking performances.
It was disappointing. I think. Will, you looked in that Sergio Perez had the worst weekend of his life, and
You
then
mean I
Chinmay,
planned for that?
yeah, and then I think relying on Lance Stroll to get a top 8 finish at Monaco was not the best idea.
No, but don't forget. I think I forgot to change that because this is meant for Imola.
This
Mm.
is true.
But
I mean,
I think
the closest you got, Chinmay, was saying Leclerc crash out. I mean, he cost himself a podium impeding Norris, but
yeah,
we can't. We'll see.
yeah.
Yeah.
But let's see. I think hopefully this weekend will be a little bit better.
Well,
But
we'll
yeah,
see. So obviously we'll start with our podium. As we were saying, we've got our new format where so we don't pick Verstappen and Perez to win every race into the next year. We will sort of draft our podium. So Chinmay this week will take his first place, then I'll take my first and second place. Chinmay will take his second and third place, and then I'll take my third place. So have to be different drivers. Just provides a bit of variety and spice. And I feel like I might know who you're about to go with first.
add some spice. Ooh, how can Verstappen? Oh no, Verstappen's gonna win the race. So I think
Okay,
I'm just gonna do that.
right. Well, I'm gonna keep my top two from Monaco. I'm gonna move. Actually, no. I'm changing that. I'm going to go for Perez and then Alonso in second place.
Fair. Okay, so for my second and third. Ooh, okay. He's. I'm gonna give it to Leclerc for second
Oh,
place,
okay.
and then Hamilton third.
Ah, you took my third place.
Actually, no. I want to go Russell third
Okay,
because he was stronger last year. So I think
great.
I might go for Russell.
Well, I am, as I mentioned, I'm going to take Hamilton in third place, I think, or I hope. This is banking on Mercedes upgrades working. Hamilton having a quietly impressive race last year after colliding with Magnussen, climbing back up to fifth place, and I'm hoping for more of the same this week.
Fair.
So, Will, who's got the strongest podium, do you think?
I'm not sure. I think I'd probably go with Chinmay. I think having Verstappen ultimately gives that to him anyway. But I think Leclerc has
Yeah.
normally been quite strong around Spain. I was surprised neither of you took Sainz at his home Grand Prix. But then
He's
I
going
guess
to be in the gravel, let's be
I
honest.
was about to
Gravel
say there's
traps.
lots of
There's
gravel.
gravel traps. So
I was hoping one of you might say that Alonso might win his home race, but I think the Red Bull's just too good.
I
yeah.
was considering Alonso P1, but I think, as you say, Red Bull's too good, and Perez to maybe make up for his performance could be the better shout.
True.
Yeah?
So yeah, what do you do for your 1 pointer then, Will?
So my 1 pointer is Spanish themed. I've gone for Sainz and Alonso in finishing in the top 8.
Top 8. Fair.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just quickly add that. Finish in top 8. I'm gonna go. Uh, I want to go for McLaren in Q3.
Okay. Very slam dunk 1 point prediction there.
Very brave.
No, I want to add that slightly. I'm going to say Piastri in Q3.
Oh, we peer pressured him into making it more difficult.
Yeah, we have. I'll change it. I'll go Piastri in Q3. I don't want to make it as because I've also realized I got Verstappen to win, so I think like I should make it a bit spicier.
Okay. For my 2 point, I've gone for most overtakes of the season so far. So the race will have more overtakes than I think it's Miami is currently first, as far as I'm aware. And yeah, will become the most race with the most overtakes of the season.
Fair. Okay. So I think for my 2 pointer, I'm gonna go. Ooh, I'm thinking of a Stroll one. I think I'm gonna go Stroll. Either Stroll finishes P18.
Wait, so you're exactly P18.
Yeah.
That's quite. I'd say 3 points. That's 3 points of
That's
territory.
very specific.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
If you
true.
got,
That's true.
I'll give you 2 points for 18th or lower. How about that?
Yeah. Okay, I'll do that. I'll do that. Probably better.
So you're hoping for a Stroll lap one collision.
Probably. Well, I mean,
With
yeah.
4 cars and he's the last to retire.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do they do that? If it's like a 3-car collision, how do you classify who finished 20th and who finished 18th or whatever?
I don't
I think-
really know.
I don't think so. Does it not?
Yeah,
I
more
don't know
so.
actually.
Well, if it's like 12th to 10th or something, then it might matter a bit for points. I'm sure there's a way of doing it. Actually, no, it's the
And
FIA. They
they might
definitely
not be
haven't thought of
classified.
that.
So.
But I think you still get points if you come top 10 not classified. It's not really
Don't
happened
know.
in a while.
I don't think it's ever happened since they've moved to 10 points. 10
I think.
points positions.
I mean, the only one I can think of is whether they got points in like '96 Monaco when like only 3 cars finished.
Yeah, true.
Well, hopefully for interest, it will be something like that this week. And my 3-pointer is 3 or more pit stops for 10 or more drivers.
Okay. I'll go 10 plus drivers have at least 3. Is it at least 3 pit stops?
Yeah, at least 3 pit stops.
Okay.
So I've combined Spain, very high surface wear on the tires, one of the highest of the season, combined with the new corner, obviously, and put even more strain on the tires, and the fact it looks like it's going to rain, hopefully.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping showers mean we'll go wet, dry, wet, dry, dry, wet, wet, dry, and then there's about 100 million pit stops, and I get the 3 points.
Fair. I think. Yeah. I mean, it's gonna probably be a bit similar to Stroll crashing, but I'm gonna go at 4 drivers DNF in the gravel traps. Like
Okay.
they beast themselves in the gravel traps.
We can get like a Nürburgring 2007 thing where they all just slide into
Yeah.
the gravel trap at turn 1.
Yeah.
There.
And yeah. But yeah, this is to do the race as well, so they have
Oh,
to
yeah, yeah.
DNF in the gravel traps.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah,
not
so-
just not just Logan Sargent overdoing the car in practice in FP2 or something like that.
Yeah. Well, I think those sound like good predictions. Will, what's your take? Who are you backing maybe with those 1, 2, and 3s?
Oh, I'm probably going to go with Chinmay. I think actually, I like the podium predictions anyway, and then I think you've got. I'm not sure about the rain. I mean, the pit stops might be interesting, but I think there's a lot more gravel. I think if you're looking for more overtaking into turn 1, you might see 2 cars in there at a time, say. So I think that could happen quite easily. And then the Lance Stroll pick is the one that is a bit concerning.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to wait and see, and we'll make sure to be watching it this weekend. The Clarendon's still open to anyone that wants to visit it, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, as far as I know, we got the Clarendon this Sunday. So as far as I know, we still have it booked.
Well, obviously we'll be there watching it. Thank you for listening and watching for another week. Obviously, been myself, Chinmay, and Will as well, and we'll be back next week to talk about Spain and so just talk about Spain because there's a week break after the Spanish Grand Prix, if I'm right.
Yeah,
They're
we got.
nodding in assent, and obviously, hopefully, very interesting Spanish Grand Prix. Thank you to Chime, thank you to Will, and I've been Will as well, and thank you for listening.